Good afternoon. I think we are live, and thank you everybody for coming to this talk. I'm sorry we're a bit late. It's all professional communicators.
Good afternoon. I think we are live.
A bit of a huge echo. Are we okay now? I will shut up and see if that echoes again. Okay, thanks very much for coming.
A bit of a huge
my
echo.
fellow panelists, could you mute? Okay, I'm sorry about this. I'm struggling a little bit with the echo. Thank you, Gush, for telling me you can hear me. I'm going to start and...
Okay, I'm sorry about this. I'm struggling a little bit with the echo. Thank you, Gush, for telling me you can hear me.
Ben, you don't happen to have this open in another window, do you?
And we're back. That was entirely my fault. Apologies to the organizers. I have too many tabs open. I was listening to myself. After the delay, which I think will help the system deal with us in an orderly fashion. Apologies for that. We have a very well-qualified panel to talk about this topic. I think it's one of the defining issues of our day, and I think it's a defining issue for the pandemic that we're living through, and possibly in our political lives as well. So there's really, it's hard to exaggerate how important the issue of misinformation and disinformation is. But also, I think it's potentially a very rich area for discussion because the simple answers don't really work. Censorship or shutting up those that appear to be peddling lies seems to frequently backfire. And the forces of correct fact seems to struggle to organize themselves to prevent the spread and the amplification of lies and dangerous rumors. So we will be discussing what it is, how it works, how it happens, what the impact is, and what can be done about it. And the panel we have today will please introduce themselves. I'm not going to do that mini bio thing. I'm the senior editor. I'll do it for myself, and they can do it for themselves. They are all communication professionals, but for me, of course, who cannot operate a webinar in 2020, and I should immediately be fired. My job is to report on policy and the humanitarian sector in general. That means the situations that we look at and the organizations that respond to them. Earlier this year, we did a big look into misinformation at the beginning of the crisis. And I'll put a link to the story, but it was about the one particular niche organization called ID 2020 that erupted into the imagination of the conspiracy theory community in an interesting and frankly kind of mind-boggling way. Our panelists today come from different backgrounds, and I'm going to start with Kate, who works for a fact-checking organization. And I'm going to ask her to define what it is. What's misinformation? What's disinformation? And how do you characterize it? Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Should I give a quick intro to Africa Check now, or are we going to do that later?
I think now is good. Yeah, I'm not going to deny you your intro. Please, go ahead.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm talking to you from Johannesburg, South Africa. My name is Kate Wilkinson, and I'm the Deputy Chief Editor at Africa Check, which is the continent's leading and largest fact-checking organization. Like Ben has suggested, we work in the field of mis and disinformation. We try to achieve a few broad goals. The first is that we work through fact-checking to reduce the spread of mis and disinformation on all public platforms, whether that's internet, in print, on platforms at rallies. We also work to make accurate information more easily available to the public, policymakers, and the media. We look to foster fact-checking across Africa, as well as help to make the public and the media better fact-checkers. So the question of what is mis and disinformation is one that we have to address quite regularly because we engage with the public a lot on this issue. Generally, from the perspective that we come from, it all comes down largely to intent. And you'll see commonly that when people talk about the difference between these two things, when we talk about misinformation, we're talking about information that could be completely wrong, that is being shared by people without the intent to deceive. And that is largely because they believe it to be correct. It's what maybe your aunt forwards you on WhatsApp. It might be what your friend posts on Facebook because they genuinely believe something. When we talk about disinformation, though, we're looking at an intention to mislead, someone who is creating something and sharing it, knowing that it is wrong and trying to mislead people on that topic. You can see how, though, those two things can start to bleed together when disinformation starts being spread by people who believe it to be true. And that's the realm that we work in, trying to help people figure out if what they want to share and spread is accurate or not, and holding people accountable who spread false information, accountable for what they share and for the things that they mislead on.
Thank you. Urvashi, you have looked at how it works, and in particular, the role of technology in enabling and amplifying mis and disinformation. Tell us about yourself and tell us how it works and how it spreads. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Urvashi Aneja. Can you hear me?
Mike.
Mic is on. You cannot hear me? You can hear me? Cool. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Urvashi Aneja. I'm one of the co-founders and directors of Tandem Research. Tandem Research, the think tank based out of India, and we work at the interface of technology, society, and sustainability. And I lead Tandem's AI and Society program, as well as its Future of Work and Learning program. So a lot of my research looks at the societal impacts of algorithmic decision-making systems, particularly in the global south, and how these algorithmic decision-making systems intersect with local, institutional, cultural, contextual realities. So to respond to your question, Ben, I think a few kind of remarks maybe to get us started, and happy to pick up on these in a follow-up round. I think the first thing to say here is that misinformation is not new. Rumors are as old as all of us, as humans. And so that's not new, right? What is new is the medium through which they are being spread. And so I think we have to pay close attention to the mechanics and the politics of that medium, and not just the content of the information itself. So research suggests that people have always spread rumors. People have always used misinformation, have used disinformation to win political gain, to win an argument, so on and so forth. But what's particularly unique about this moment is the virality of this misinformation. So why does this misinformation spread so fast? That, to me, is the core issue. And a lot of that is because of the way the algorithms on social media platforms are designed to optimize user engagement. So they are designed to optimize, they're designed to make viral content that is more emotive, because that's what we like to share more. And so that, to me, is the key factor that we need to pay attention to. And just to add to that, a lot of there's a few ways I think we can think about social media platforms. You can think of them as neutral platforms, right? They don't have any responsibility. People are just posting things. You can think of them as publishers, similar to traditional legacy media houses. if we think of them as that, then there's certain responsibilities that come with being a publishing house. So you don't see The Guardian, for an example, running large-scale political advertising on its front page. Or we can think of them as the editors of information, as the curators of information. So they amplify certain kinds of information over others, right? So there's these three distinct ways of thinking about the role of social media platforms, and each of them has a specific role, or each of them leads us to specific directions when thinking about how to address why misinformation spreads and how to address it. So I'll pause there, but happy to pick up on each of these points as we go around this discussion.
That's great. There's so much to get through. Halim works for the World Health Organization, in the thick of it, I think would be fair for us to say. I didn't in the beginning give an introduction. I assume that this is an audience that is very familiar with at least the idea of anti-vaccination kind of ideas and the impact that's had in public health, seeing as how we have a lot of doctors in the audience. I wouldn't try to give you a briefing, but one number came out today that over 30% of Germans think that the safety of vaccines is not fully disclosed. It's a new survey commissioned by YouGov and The Guardian. So this is already, I spoke to somebody in WHO actually who said that this is one of the exports of the developed world to the developing world, is that the anti-vax movement started generally speaking, in the north and in Western Europe, and actually now has traveled. So, Halim, my question to you is, who is it affecting? And what is the impact of public health related mis and disinformation?
Apologies, technical failure. So wanted to thank you, Ben, and it's really good to be here among colleagues such as Kate and Urvashi, who work in the same space, and we work very closely with Kate and Africa Czech in what we're trying to build as a platform to respond to the infodemic. That's a term that earlier this year, and we're trying to ground the fight against misinformation, against health misinformation, as an infodemic, and ground it as a science to respond to it. And just to highlight, vaccine hesitancy is a very complicated problem that healthcare workers have been struggling with in different contexts. Definitely the anti-vax movement and their perception, especially grounding their arguments in the rights argument, is something that is quite Western. But at the same time, vaccine hesitancy in the developing world is something that is rooted in different beliefs. We have seen in 2003, for example, in Nigeria, we've seen vaccine hesitancy and the banning of vaccination campaigns with the polio campaigns due to religious fear that that the vaccine is made of pig's blood, that they cause sterilization in women and in children and all of that. So it's a very deeply rooted problem, and vaccine misinformation has been around for a very long time. As Urvashi has mentioned, the medium has changed the landscape of responding to this kind of misinformation. We see that, for example, with misinformation around and disinformation, actually, around the 5G networks and how they are and how they cause COVID, people started burning 5G towers, and it became a very big problem. At the moment, we can see a lot of, and just linking to your point, Ben, around misinformation coming from the West. Like today, we are seeing a group of doctors who came out online, and they basically COVID deniers, and they're saying that it's not the problem, it's not a real problem, and it's just a seasonal issue and seasonal disease and all of this. And that kind of misinformation is definitely circulating in the world, in our part of the world, in the global south, with a lot of mutation and people starting to empower, again, because it's an emotive content, as Kate has mentioned, it's making it more difficult for people to comply with the necessary public health measures to stop the transmission of COVID-19.
Just a quick follow-up. Is there a measurement of how many people got sick or even sadly died as a result of public health misinformation?
So that's actually one of the key research questions that we're trying to investigate, and it's we've held the first infodemiology conference earlier this year, and we're holding another round, a second session in December, and we're trying through this conference, through this academic conference, to bring in those interdisciplinary scholars to try as much as possible to prioritize our research agenda, and that's definitely on top of it. The brief answer to your question is no, because in order to be able to measure that, you need to make sure that a lot of data sets are aligned, the research methodology across different disciplines is aligned, from understanding the epidemiological data, and then the misinformation and the volume of it, the medium that it's circulating on it. And that's the kind of research that we really want to, through the partnership that we're trying to build between operational agencies, fact-checking organizations, media partners, as well as with the ministries of health, to try as much as possible to understand the impact of the infodemic and the burden of it in real life. Right.
Kate, what's kind of the life cycle of what's the kind of information, rumor, and nuggets of misinformation that you deal with, and do they vary from country to country in your experience?
Absolutely, Ben. So I actually remember the first fact check that we did on COVID. It was back in February, and it sort of feels quite surreal to think back to that day. I can remember it vividly. We fact-checked this image that was being shared in South Africa, which showed the back of a Dettol surface cleaner, which is just a household product, where it said that it had been proven to kill coronavirus. And that lit up South Africa, because there was all this speculation that Dettol knew it was coming, that the virus was part of this big conspiracy, and that certain groups, businesses, agencies had been given foreknowledge of it. And that was our intro to COVID fact-checking. But since then, what we've seen has been varied. Some of it has been what we're used to seeing around health misinformation. Some of it hasn't. But I would say largely what we've seen around COVID-19 and mis and disinformation around coronavirus has fallen into what we typically see when it comes to health misinformation. I'm so happy that Helene brought up the example of misinformation in northern Nigeria in 2003, because that's actually Africa Check's origin story. Our founder was deeply involved in Nigeria. He witnessed the devastating effect of this misinformation around vaccination and saw how the continent desperately needed organizations, not just Africa Check, but many fact-checking organizations, to help the public, the media, and governments understand what they were seeing and be able to check if it was true. So we've seen a lot of things broadly. In the beginning, we saw misinformation and false information about where it was spreading, how many cases there were, who had released it, if it had been engineered. We then saw a move towards disinformation and false information about who it affected. Something that we had to counter quite hard on the continent was the false messaging that was being shared that claimed that African and Black people were immune to or wouldn't get the coronavirus. The danger of that being that if people believed it, they then wouldn't take precautions that everyone was being advised to take, and they may put themselves at risk. But where we really see the real value in fact-checking are really around health is when it comes to cures and prevention. And sadly, we have seen a lot of false information being shared that really puts people's lives at risk if they were to follow it. We've seen the president of Tanzania advising people to inhale steam that's 100 degrees Celsius because it will disintegrate the virus in your body. Again, not great advice and probably could leave you with some pretty serious burns. And we've seen claims of cures, remedies, natural treatments being touted as ways to vaccinate yourself or prevent yourself from getting it or to heal yourself that, again, have no basis in science and really don't serve people's health in this issue. So we're busy.
Yeah. Lena, you emphasize the role of the platforms in servicing this and the algorithmic way in which things go viral. But some of this is just people forwarding it, you know, the WhatsApp enables you to forward it up to 100 people and so on. How do you distinguish the responsibility of the platform and the responsibility of the individual user?
Yeah, no, good question. I think tough question. Maybe just to come back a little bit or also to tie it into what Kate was saying as well. I mean, in some of the research that I've seen coming out of the Indian context, and I don't claim that holds true for all other contexts, but some of the research coming around in the Indian context seems to suggest that people share misinformation on WhatsApp because they're bored. It's plainly as boring as that, right? So it's not often that they don't know it's misinformation. Often they know it's misinformation, right? And often the misinformation that gets spread the most is not the information where there is a scientific fact that can be disputed, or there's a fact that can be disputed scientifically or validated scientifically, right? It's things that appeal to an emotional or cultural set of beliefs. So I think that makes this much harder to deal with, because you can't simply just verify our way out of this problem, right? It is deeply, deeply cultural. And I think where we see that is on WhatsApp platforms, right? Where it's not so much the algorithms that are optimizing for user engagement, but people are just sharing, and they're sharing blindly. I mean, India, I think, is famous for sharing the most amount of good morning messages in any other part of the world and draining a lot of bandwidth because the amount of time to say good morning to each other, right? Like, so it's a cultural phenomenon, right? And I'm not sure how much we can use scientific tools to address cultural phenomena. We probably need to start thinking much deeper about why are people sitting around and nothing else to do but their smartphone and just sharing random stuff, right? Does it have to do with education? Does it have to do with literacy? Does it have to do with employment? I believe like all of those other socio-cultural factors have a big role to play in how that information or why that information spreads on WhatsApp, and which is why simple kind of technical fixes won't be enough, right? So WhatsApp, for an example, has new features that prevent you from forwarding to over an X number of people, right? Twitter has just launched a new feature on Twitter. I mean, it's a different kind of platform that in terms of how you retweet, right? So these technical fixes will get us part of the way, but eventually they can't address what is a deeply societal problem. And that's why I don't know, and Kate would know the numbers on this better, or maybe Halim would know the numbers on this better, but whether there's any correlations with societal fragmentation, high levels of employment, low levels of education, literacy, so on and so forth, and the spread of some of these on peer-to-peer networks like WhatsApp. So some things the platforms can fix and they must fix, but some things are deeply ingrained societal problems where we will hit a wall if we keep looking to technical fixes.
Ben, can I just respond to Yavashi about that, because I think she's raised a really, really important point. And that is, when it comes to something like WhatsApp, and it's something that Africa Check has really put a lot of time and effort into addressing this year, is that you can't replicate the way that you distribute information on WhatsApp and expect it to take off. We were in the business of just sending people links, sending people text, expecting them to click through and read an 800 to 1,000 word article. But where we really saw a shift and a change was when we made the content we were sending out on WhatsApp as engaging as probably other content that was being distributed. And we started a show called What's Crap on WhatsApp, which is a podcast that is distributed via voice note. It's 5 to 7 minutes long. We send it to about 6,000 people twice a month, where it's a really funny, not very serious way where we debunk messages on WhatsApp that have been going viral, and we're not serious about it. And the response has been amazing. And it's shown us how we can't just carry on like we have. We actually have to find ways to give people accurate information in a format that they find entertaining.
That sounds great. Please put the link in the, whatever the instructions in the thing. I mean, WHO has the kind of institutional, fact-based, science, knowledge thing, but does that get through to people? Or as Kate says, do you need to change your tactics a bit?
That's a great question, Ben. So measuring the impact is something that we're still experimenting with. So for example, if we look at the volume of the fact check, for example, if we compare the volume of content with the specific piece of misinformation and compare it with a fact check, we will unfortunately lose because first of all, as Kate mentioned, most of the fact checkers, with very few exceptions, they produce their debunks as, they rely on WHO as a source as well as other agencies, but the content, the end result is basically a journalistic piece. It does not compete with the emotive nature of a video or a photo that's basically triggering to people. So when we try and quantify through the volume, we realize that we're losing in terms of the virality of this piece of misinformation is much higher than the actual correct information for a number of reasons. First of all, the format. Secondly, it's related to the fact that the other side is using bots, for example, and they really use it to amplify these messages, and it's not a fair fight if that's the case. So what we're trying to do as much as possible is to build a network of collaborators who would enable us to disseminate the information better, to amplify the fact checks that the fact checkers are doing through trying and working with them on producing a more engaging or turning the journalistic pieces to more engaging content through the formats that we can have. And the second thing is trying as much as possible to make sure that the response is timely. And the kind of old school at WHO, and I think in many agencies, when it comes to responding to misinformation, is the fear that we through debunking or commenting, or we just give it too much credit, and we basically amplify the misinformation, which is a balance. We completely understand and we're completely aware of it, but we really need more experimentation on that front. And definitely through the partnership that we're trying to build as much as possible, we're trying to have these kind of tests through different topics in order to be able to make sure that there is some sort of balance. But definitely the study, again, that's another research question that we're really trying to dig deeper into.
Thanks. Urvashi, is there a profit factor here? That when things go viral, somebody's making some money, and therefore that makes it harder to stop it?
I mean, the entire social media, all social media's platforms are run on a core ad tech business, right? So you're selling advertising space, and you're selling user engagement to advertisers. So the more user engagement there is around a particular piece of content, the more valuable that whole interaction is, and therefore better for advertisers, or is allegedly better for advertisers. So there's a very clear business model to why we want to optimize for maximum user engagement. It's not just to have user engagement for the sake of it. It is to enable us to have these so-called free services.
I kind of fell off the internet there, so I don't quite know what you said, but I think we'll come back to the politics question. We ran an article at the beginning of the epidemics talking about how people just kind of want to get a name for themselves, that there's a kind of ego factor, that if you can seem to be the expert, or you can seem to be debunking the experts, or you can seem to be radically challenging them, there's some sort of human trait here, Kate, maybe, that people like to be different, or they get some social credit for it. How do you make it non-sexy?
Yeah, so I think that there are different incentives for different players. And one player that we focus on is just normal member of the public. And what we do tend to see, and even I fall prey to it, I think everyone who's on WhatsApp with friends or family, if you find a legitimate piece of news, if there's a breaking story, you like to be the one to send it to people. You know, you like to deliver something juicy. And that is also the case when it comes to false information. Right now in South Africa, people's phones are buzzing on WhatsApp because there are voice notes doing the rounds with some very husky man sort of speaking muffled into his phone that there's going to be a hard lockdown again, and people are losing their minds. And what we have been trying to do through a number of media literacy campaigns is actually through WhatsApp, largely through voice notes again, is to take people through a series of weeks where we teach them basic media literacy skills. And one of the things that we really emphasize time and time again is breaking that moment between receiving something and passing it on. Because what we found is that the moment someone is shocked or scared or angry or worried, their ability to actually engage with a piece of content, to reason about it, to interrogate it, dramatically reduces. And this is the one skill, if I could wave a magic wand and give it to everyone, it's trying to get people to pause. And that's largely what we're focusing on at the moment, because if we can get people to stop and think, we believe that we'd see a reduction in the spread of a lot of this false information.
So yeah, there's a sort of dopamine factor, but Urvashi, there's also a danger, is there not, in censorship, in trying to have a single version of the truth? Mark Dubois in the comment there has made it an elaborately phrased argument, which I will oversimplify and say there is no truth, right? There is no truth. When I researched the article about Bill Gates and the tipping people, he had paid, his foundation had paid for a tattoo system to ink somebody invisibly as a marker of vaccine. So when you say, well, no, Bill Gates doesn't want to chip you, well, I'm not sure with that. I'm not sure he doesn't, right? I mean, how confident are we in the truth here? And who's in charge?
How much time do we have, Ben? Hi, Mark.
Yeah,
how much time do we have?
3.2 minutes.
No, I mean, no, I'll be brief. I mean, I want to respond to also something that Kate said and then take your question, if that's okay. I mean, I appreciate and I recognize the importance of media literacy for individuals, but I do think we place too much onus or too much responsibility on individuals to have to protect themselves against something that is a structural force and is beyond the capacity of individuals to protect. So I don't think that is a fruitful approach. I think that's the cherry on top. That's the icing. That's not going to address this problem. Ben seems to go off every time I start talking, so maybe I should talk less so he has more space. But yeah, so I actually don't think that's a viable approach, and I do think that, especially in context in the global South, especially in a number of humanitarian contexts, that moment of pause is a real luxury. I think just as COVID has demonstrated that working at home or distance is a luxury, so is pause a luxury. And so I think both things need to happen side by side. And I know that's not what you were suggesting, Kate. Of course, I know that you're not suggesting that one is trumps the other. But just to kind of focus, I think, on the structural element of this, and particularly for countries in the global South where institutional capacities are very weak. So that's on can individuals protect themselves, and will that be enough? And what are the downsides of expecting individuals to protect themselves, particularly in difficult contexts? On the fake news bit, I mean, I think just to go back to something Kate said in the beginning, I mean, I don't think we're talking about fake news. We're talking about misinformation and disinformation. I don't think the language of fake news is actually very productive because it takes us down exactly this question of what is the truth. I don't think we're debating on what is the truth. I think the question is, when is information intentionally or unintentionally used to change or manipulate public opinion? That's what's at stake, not the truth. So I don't think we're going to get to a question of truth, right? And I think that's also precisely why saying things like, for Facebook to have a social media council or have these global content moderation teams, that's going to fix it. It's not going to fix it, because what is your truth and my truth is very different. So that's not what is at stake here. What is at stake is the use of information, intentionally or unintentionally, to change how people perceive a situation.
Thank you. Halim, how do you view that problem? How far do you want to go in defining what is and is not correct?
I think we need to, especially in a scientific space and with health misinformation, everybody needs to understand that science is not obsolete. It changes, and whenever we have new information and new research on a specific topic, things change. That really makes it much more difficult when, for example, there is a specific measure or a specific recommendation that then gets adjusted, and that really drives the rumor mill and feeds it. So I think what we try to do as WHO is to try to stick to what we know at the moment. So we try to be as factual as possible with the guidance that we give based on empirical evidence, and to be very concise about it in communicating it. And I completely agree with Urvashi when she said that there is like media literacy is might not be the most effective way, but it's definitely one of the elements of a broader strategy, and that's what we're trying to do by institutionalizing and not just in institutionalizing it by having a glossy social media campaign about misinformation literacy or media literacy, but really getting everybody who's involved in a public health response, in an emergency response, to be aware and to have the literacy about how to deal with this, and where are the right channels to direct this kind of claims, and how can we provide a timely response. And definitely the media literacy it could be suitable for an urban setting, for example, but not for a community in an IDP camp. So that's something that we completely acknowledge. But really, every single click counts at this stage. So somebody sharing something in Johannesburg or in Cape Town might reach somebody in an IDP camp in northern Nigeria. So and here we've been seeing there's a lot of there are no borders anymore, obviously, in how misinformation spreads. So trying to focus on the factual information on its own is not enough. We need to make sure that we explain and break down the information. We need to work on pre-bunking, on anticipating the misinformation, and trying to respond to them. And that's something that WHO has been trying to work on while briefing and conducting these close briefings with fact checkers and media outlets and interested influencers to brief them on upcoming trends. So, for example, before the certification of wild polio virus, we reached out to our partners and we tried to explain to them, okay, so we have this big event coming up in the African region in August. Here are a list of popular misinformation that came out from different regions and on this topic. So that's one thing. Another thing is also trying as much as possible to debunk. And the science of debunking here on a public health issue is a bit complicated from elections or climate change or any other topic. Like trying to understand, because it's really linked to people's behavior, and there is the risk communications and community engagement colleagues that we have working on the topic have a long time of experience in that. And that's where, when exactly should we respond and when should we issue a debunk and all of that. Again, right. So many questions around a very complicated topic.
How are you, Kate, going to get ahead of, presumably you're expecting a new wave of this around a future COVID-19 vaccine or other techniques that are emerging? How do you get ahead of the problem if you can?
So this is a very important part of the work that we do. So Typically, how we work is we identify through a number of mechanisms statements which are made in the public domain, which can be fact-checked, and it's actually has to be quite a specific statement which you can fact-check. We contact the person who made the claim, we look at the evidence, we speak to experts, we publish a report, we may say incorrect, we distribute it. We know, though, that we will never get that report, that piece of accurate information, to every single person who has been misled or misinformed on that topic. We try, but we know it's not going to happen. So that is our sort of reactive fact checking. Something is said, we react and we fact check. We put a lot of focus, though, on proactive fact checking, which is sort of more like inoculating or giving people the information that they need. In South Africa, what we've done, because South Africa is actually involved in one of the trials, is we've tried to get ahead of the issue. And so as well as investigating and debunking any false information we see about the vaccine in South Africa, we've produced a very elaborate, very detailed, but still accessible fact sheet on how drugs and vaccines are approved in the country. And it goes through all the steps. It gives people questions they should ask if they hear about a vaccine, so that we hope that when people have questions about it, they can find this information. When people see a statement being made, they have a resource they can fact check it with. But we also look to translate that into different formats. We put it into videos online, we put it into voice notes. And it's an integral part of trying to make people more resilient to false information that we know is coming.
Urvashi, are there sanctions you would like to see against the tech platforms that would give them a bit of accountability?
Yeah, I think we need much more than a bit of accountability. There needs to be a lot more accountability for tech platforms. I think tech platforms are hidden behind legislation, which allows them to present themselves as neutral platforms, that the only thing that they're doing is just providing a space for people to post information, and that they don't have a stake in this, right? But that's not true. Tech platforms should be held, they are the largest news source. And they were even pre-pandemic, and now if you look at the numbers, the usage of social media platforms to access mainstream news has increased. So they should be held to the same standards of accountability and responsibility as traditional publishing houses. If the New York Times or the Guardian or any other major publishing house printed misinformation on its front page, it would be held accountable for it. And it would not be a question of is it free speech or not. That's not the conversation we will be having. And I think the same responsibility must hold for tech platforms.
I feel like the famous uncle on Facebook is a sort of someone who deserves some defense, really. But let's say I am an uncle, actually. Let's say I post something stupid. Is it Facebook's fault?
It's not Facebook's fault that you post something stupid. But if what you post goes viral, and that is because of the algorithms that are amplifying it, that's on Facebook. That's not on you.
Right, cool. That is clear. Aline's dropped off. We'll come back to you, Kate. I really like the idea of the voice notes. But I'm going to give you a less friendly question. Are you just giving Facebook a bit of lipstick on the pig by being their in-house fact checker? Isn't the problem basically the algorithm? The algorithm is poison, and that it can't be decorated.
So for anyone without any background to our involvement with Facebook, in October 2018, we joined Facebook's third-party fact-checking program. And essentially what that means is a group of fact-checkers who are members of the International Fact-Checking Network and who abide by their principles are eligible to take part in this program, where Facebook pays fact-checking organizations to fact-check and verify content which is flagged as potentially false. And it is flagged either through an algorithm that Facebook uses or through users reporting information as false. So you can do that if you're on Facebook and you look at a post, top right, 3 dots, report false information. And if we fact check something and we find it to be incorrect, we rate it as such. And on that decision that we make, Facebook down ranks that post, which means that it will not be shared and spread automatically in the same way that Urvashi has said. The algorithm doesn't just run as normal, it sort of gets a stop order. We consider it a very important part of the work that we do. for a number of reasons. One, like I said earlier, if we fact check a message on WhatsApp or even a newspaper story, we often have very limited ability to actually make sure that every time someone sees that message in the future, they also see a fact check. And with Facebook, that's what the program allows us to do. If there is a false message telling you to inhale steam to cure COVID, we will mark it as false. And if you try to share that message, if it's a URL and you try to post it, or even if you're scrolling through your friend's feed and you see it, you will see that it's been rated false by a fact checker, and there will be a link to the accurate information. So I think that there are much broader questions about platforms' roles, what they can be doing better, the programs, how this program works and what this program could do that is better. But right now, it's one of the most direct ways that we have to putting accurate information in front of people, especially on important health issues.
But does it make sense for it to be outsourced to I guess you're a non-profit group of well-intentioned professional? I mean, should it not be in-house? Should it not be part of their capacity?
That's probably a question for Facebook, but I think from our perspective, and it comes back to the issue of truth, what is correct? In South Africa, we have a number of different fact-checking organizations that rate content as part of the program. So you may find if you're scrolling through Facebook, you'll see a piece of content is rated as false, and it will tell you that both AFP Fact Check and Africa Check have made this finding. And I think that adds credibility to the fact checking that we do, because it isn't one entity, Facebook, which, as Urvashi has pointed out, there's some serious questions about the role that they should and do play. It isn't this one organization saying this is what is true or not. You can see that it is a number of fact-checking organizations who have independently, on their own, in their own organizations, verified this information and have reached what is in most cases the same findings, and you can compare those fact checks. And I think that also shows people that fact checkers are working on the same problems separately, and the findings are strengthened when they come to the same findings.
Do you sometimes wish, I'm going to stick with you one more question, Kate. Do you sometimes wish you were more campaigning? That you're forced to be super kind of cautious and super fair and objective. Don't you sometimes just want to say, of course you don't inhale steam?
Yeah, so I think that that's actually two different questions. I think the second sort of thing that you want to scream, which is, for the love of God, do not inhale steam. That's more a communication question. And from what we have found, fact checking is effective when it comes with empathy. When you fact check and you don't make people feel stupid, you don't make people feel like they've been duped, because you have to understand that in many cases, people are working with the best information they have, and that might be a message they received on WhatsApp. So you need to give people some empathy and some understanding for what they may have been misled to believe. The first question of advocacy and campaigning is an interesting one. In some ways, we are an advocacy organization, and that's for accurate information. And, the work that we do tries to hold public figures accountable. We try to ensure that accurate information is central in all debates, and especially in government policy, because it's imperative that all those discussions and decisions and all the funding that is spent is evidence-based.
Halim, welcome back. We were discussing whether sometimes you might want to be more aggressive, that just being cautious and factual doesn't meet the challenge. I've read a number of occasions that WHO keeps saying that it's putting out the right stuff, but it's not going to correct every time somebody puts out the wrong stuff. Are you sure that's right? Don't you need to just take these people on?
I think there needs to be some sort of, we need to be much more creative, definitely, with how we respond to this. And WHO responding through its institutional voice is not always the best way to respond to that. That's why we're hoping to, through building this partnership that I've been talking about, we would be able to create something with a new identity that would be more inclusive to different partners. So, for example, humor is something that could be useful, but at the same time, humor could be something that could be, it's a double-edged sword, because it could also,
please tell me WHO doesn't have a jokes team.
Unfortunately, we don't at the moment.
No. Okay.
We're working on it. But at the same time, it's not just about WHO, and that's why I just want to reiterate once again, it cannot happen through one organization. WHO has the technical knowledge, that's for sure. But we have UNICEF, for example, who have the access to the local communities in the field. And the thing is, misinformation is not just online, and it does access and does reach populations that don't have access to the internet, because it keeps on mutating over and over. So what we need to do, as you said, then, is to be more aggressive, but we need to also be smart. We need to try as much as possible to have the guts to experiment a bit, and to try and deal with some backlash or backfire in some cases. And that's an approach that WHO and the partners are actually interested in pursuing, because we know that what we're doing at the moment is not enough. We need to do more. We need to be to try different approaches simultaneously, and through, for example, working on the correcting the information and debunking, explaining, working on creating policies and protocols inside the incident management team that works in the Ministry of Health, and the emergency operations centers that manage the pandemic, and working with the risk communications colleagues and understanding the feedback from the community, building this network of amplifiers to try to actually make the correct information reach the different people. All of these approaches have never been, we haven't successfully implemented all of these approaches all together at once and tried to measure the impact of them. And that's what we're trying to push forward to through this alliance and partnership that we're trying to do. And definitely the response on social media is part of it, but also radios, for example. That's a massive outlet of misinformation. And the radio hosts might have access to the misinformation, and they might amplify the misinformation on the radio channels, and then you don't know what's the impact of that. And that's something that we have seen significantly in a number of occasions.
A very quick follow-up. What you're doing, I assume, is what political influencers are also trying to do. So political disinformation, smearing your opponent. I mean, do you look at the political space and think they're ahead of you on this? Or do you look at the fashion space on Instagram and you see that those influencers have got better techniques than you have? Who do you look to for inspiration?
You mean as WHO?
As in the health space, who is doing this better? If we look at politics or entertainment, or let's say other campaigning types of action online, who's good at it?
I think there's the elections, definitely. There's a lot of the different initiatives, and when we started reaching out to fact checkers, and my experience with fact checkers was started through a Czech conference that was held in Beirut actually a few years back, and that's where we started having these conversations about, there are teams and organizations working on this, and definitely the debunking that the first draft has worked on, and Midan and Czech, these initiatives that started with the elections, and even the model that we're trying to propose now in the African region to try to debunk in this alliance. This has been done in Mexico under an initiative called Verificado, and it was during the elections. And that's the kind of thing that we want to do, and we really don't want to have something just limited to COVID-19, because health misinformation is much bigger than this pandemic, and it's much also rooted into, and the conspiracy theories are rooted in different elements that are really impact the kind of convictions of people through different players, the history of colonialism, so many different things.
I'm going to stop you there, because that leads me nicely to the next thing. Alexander in the chat has said, is there not a certain amount of patronizing, and this is for you, Avashi, that this sort of controlling the message from the top down is a sort of, has a colonial flavor and a patronizing flavor. How would you view the politics of this in that sense?
I don't know if it's patron. I mean, I think it's meant with the best intentions. I think it's trying to fix the problem. And I think it's part of the solution of trying to fix the problem. But like I said earlier, I don't think it is getting to the core of the problem. So I think it's, I wouldn't be so harsh as to say it's patronizing. But I do think it avoids or sidesteps the structural issue. So if you look at how misinformation is spread, and again, I feel most confident speaking on the Indian context, but I think this could apply globally as well. A lot of the misinformation is actually spread by governments, right? Or proxies for government. So if you allow political advertising on a social media platform, and then you wonder why you have governments or proxies for governments spreading misinformation, they're your client, essentially, right? That's where the money comes from. So you can do fact checking and you can say that people need to have media literacy and understand these things better. But unless you address a basic structural issue, that you cannot have political advertising on social media platforms, which are apparently the town hall or the town square for people, right? So unless you address that, you're not fixing what is at the core of the problem. So I think if you only do one and not the other, there is a risk of patronizing, right? Because you're only addressing the downstream fallouts of misinformation. But if you're doing both an upstream and downstream kind of intervention, which is addressing both the structural reasons for it as well as the fallouts, then perhaps it's not patronizing. It's just trying to find whatever tools are available to address a really complex problem.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes more. Nora's granted us 5 minutes more. Kate, I think I saw it on Urvashi's Twitter feed, but there was a study that said that the fact checkers were not getting it right in, I think, in one of the South Asian markets. But I would say in general, isn't this just an arms race that you have a fact checker and then you discredit the fact checker? And then we see this, a little bit of this in the American politics now, and we certainly see it in the Syria disinformation space. If you read that very long article about the white helmets today. Doesn't this just go on forever? That someone's going to discredit you and then they're going to say, oh, the fact checkers are trying to hide the real truth from you and they're just part of the conspiracy. I mean, where does this end?
That's a good question. I mean, I've been at Africa Check for 7.5 years now, and the joke.
You still haven't fixed the problem.
I haven't fixed it, but the fact checkers do have jokes, and one of them is, we'll always be busy because there's always someone who's spreading false information. What I think though is that this year has shown me and has shown our organization how important the work that we do is. And I think it comes back to the question of whether it's patronizing, is that our organization was launched in 2012. And to date in this year, so to October in 2020, we received 44% of our all-time visitors to the website. So we're approaching half to all our uniques who have ever visited our website in the last 10 months. And we've seen growth in that way on other platforms. And what it shows is that there is a demand for accurate information. And there are certainly cases where there are fact checkers who get it wrong. And there are people who present themselves as fact checkers who have ulterior motives. I think the first thing is that membership to the IFCN, the International Fact Checking Network, is an assurance to a reader, a politician, a member of the media that an organization meets very basic and important standards for impartiality, transparency, honesty about where their funding comes from. And that should really be the first stamp that you look for on any website. Where it ends, I hope it ends with more people being able to make better decisions about their lives, whether it's about whether to take a home remedy, whether it's about who to vote for, where to live, or who to trust in their government. Because like it is a systemic problem, it also comes down ultimately to individual decisions made by individual people in difficult situations. And You know, we're fighting this battle at a lot of different levels. And what we are actually looking forward to is we're conducting a randomized control study on one of our interventions, specifically on WhatsApp, where we are looking for the first time to see whether the intervention actually results in belief and behavior change on the platform. Because if we see if it does, and we can measure that, we can start having an idea of the actual impact that we're having in this fight.
Great. I think that sounded rather like a final thought. So final thoughts also from you, Halim, briefly, please. What do you see in the coming months, and what are you looking at?
I think in the coming months, as the world is bracing itself for the COVAX and the COVID vaccine, there's definitely a lot of work that needs to be done ahead of that, in terms of setting up some sort of a system that's systemizing and institutionalizing the fact checks and the debunking and response to misinformation on all levels is extremely important. There's the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories is kind of endless, and the kind of meta of the WHO, the fact checkers, and everybody is corrupt and everybody is fake, and the whole sense of reality gets distorted. It's something that we will continue to see. And the only thing that we can do is to come together and address this as a collective, rather than leaving one branch of the solution on its own to hang to dry. So I think it's, again, reiterating the importance of collaboration and interdisciplinary approach towards the problem. And it's a very complicated problem. Nobody has silver bullet to solve it. But at the end of the day, we all need to come together and put our heads together to find a solution, because, as you said, it's an arms race and there are two sides, and we're trying just to stay factual at the end of the day.
Urvashi, you have the final word.
Oh, it's not a question, just a final word. Okay. I think one of the things that we don't talk about often is really traditional old school ways to address rumors, which is the news, right? Credible news media. And we see that their revenues are declining, they're losing staff. We see that even more in the context of a pandemic. So to me, that is one of the industries or kind of pillars of democracy that we really need to invest much more in if we're going to address misinformation. People need information, and they need multiple sources of information, and the news has to be credible. And so some of the conversations, for an example, in Australia about taxing social media platforms, so when they're sharing content from traditional media houses, etc. I think a really promising way to go, and could help address some of these issues at a more structural level.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. From India, from South Africa, from Cairo, and from Jordan. Have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.